It was a Tuesday, just an ordinary Tuesday, when Lydia's world cracked open. She was emptying the dishwasher, the clinking of plates a familiar mundane rhythm. Nathan, her husband, walked in, grabbed a glass, and said it. He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. "You know, sometimes I feel like I settle for you." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold. On the outside, Lydia didn't flinch. She just placed another plate in a cupboard, her movements steady, but inside, a storm was raging. A lifetime of small compromises, of shrinking herself to make him feel bigger, all came rushing to the surface. And what Nathan didn't know, what he couldn't possibly fathom in that moment, was that Lydia was on the verge of closing a deal. A $34 million deal. Their story began in Chicago, a city full of big dreams. Nathan was the embodiment of that energy. He was loud, charismatic, always talking about his next big disruption. He was a startup guy, a visionary at least in his own mind. Lydia was different. She was quieter, more methodical. She was building her company, groundwork studio, brick by brick, client by client. It was an architecture and design firm, and she poured her heart and soul into it. From the outside, you'd think Nathan was the breadwinner. He had the swagger, the confidence. But the reality, Lydia was the one paying the mortgage. Lydia was the one covering the bills when Nathan's visionary startups inevitably failed, one after another. She was the stable foundation he built his castles in the sky upon, but he never saw it that way. To him, her firm was just a modest passion project, something to keep her busy, and so Lydia learned to shrink. She downplayed her successes, absorbed his failures, and made herself smaller so his ego could have more room to breathe. The emotional toll was immense, a slow erosion of her own sense of self. Then came the offer. Harlow Capital, a major investment firm, had been watching Groundwork Studio. They saw what Nathan refused to see, its potential, its quiet brilliance. They offered to buy a 60% stake for $34 million. It was life-changing, validating, everything Lydia had worked for. She had been wrestling with the decision, even planning how to break the news to Nathan gently, how to manage his reaction. But then came Tuesday, then came the insult. "I feel like I settled for you." And in that moment, something shifted inside her. The need to apologize for her success. The instinct to tiptoe around his fragile ego, it just evaporated. That single cruel comment was the permission she didn't know she needed. It was permission to stop shrinking. She started making calls, not to clients, but to lawyers and financial advisors. She began the quiet, deliberate process of untangling their lives, protecting her assets, and preparing for a future that was suddenly dazzlingly her own. She was no longer building a life around Nathan. She was building a life for herself. The day she signed the papers with Harlow Capital was surreal. The ink dried, and just like that, over $11 million was hers. The first step into her new life. She came home that evening, and the universe, it seems, has a sense of timing. Nathan was waiting for her, looking serious. He'd just come from a talk with his friend Devin, another aspiring startup guru. "Lydia," he began, his voice filled with a kind of rehearsed solemnity, "I think we need to separate. I feel like you're holding me back. I need to be with someone who's on my level, someone who pushes me." He was essentially breaking up with her for not being ambitious enough. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And Lydia, she didn't fight. She didn't cry. She didn't list all the ways she'd supported him. She just looked at him and said, "Okay." The speed of her agreement stunned him into silence. A few days later, the press release went out. Harlow Capital acquires majority stake in Groundwork Studio for $34 million. Nathan's phone started blowing up. His friends, his family, everyone was sending him the link. The modest passion project was a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and his wife, the woman he'd just left for, holding him back, was its architect. His phone rang. It was Lydia. He expected tears, regret. Instead, she was calm, telling him she'd have his things packed. Then came the desperate text, "We need to talk." He came back to the house, the same house she paid for, and they sat at the kitchen table where it all fell apart. He looked bewildered, hurt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Tell you what, Nathan?" Lydia replied, her own voice even steady. "That my business was successful. You never asked. You were so busy telling me about your next big idea that you never once asked about mine. You never visited my office, you never met my team, you never read a single article about my work. You decided I was average, that I was something you settled for, and you never bothered to look any closer." He started to talk about their history, about a future, about how this changes things. He was trying to reconcile, trying to claw his way back in. But Lydia held up a hand. "You're right, Nathan. The math has changed, for you, but for me, the relationship is over. The numbers look good to you now, but the person who earned them is the same person you didn't value a week ago. I'm choosing me." The aftermath was cleaner than she could have imagined. The divorce was swift. Without the financial entanglement he'd hoped for, Nathan didn't put up a fight. Lydia poured her energy into groundwork, which, with Harlow's backing, expanded into new markets, becoming a leader in sustainable urban design. She found herself taking up space in her own life, speaking up in meetings, traveling, and rediscovering the parts of herself she had packed away for so long. People would say she seemed so much more confident, but that wasn't it. The confidence was always there, buried under the weight of someone else's expectations. What changed was her refusal to seek permission to be herself, especially from people who were never qualified to give it in the first place. And that Tuesday? She looks back on it now, not with bitterness, but with a strange sense of gratitude. Nathan's casual cruelty wasn't the wound that broke her. It was the final crack in the facade that let the light in, allowing her to finally, clearly, see her own worth. Thank you so much for watching. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about finding your own power. See you next time.